right, this is the axle swap video. So it's not all going to be done today, but in your guys' time, it'll all be done today. So one video for the axle swap. I'm filming right now the same time I was the last video I released, just because I have some of these parts in and I'm just too excited. I want to get some of this pretty blue parts on these axles. So step one, I got 2-degree shim bushings, because these are for a 2-inch to I think 4 or 5 inch. So it's a 2-degree offset bushing. So they're labeled. This is the front bottom. That's a front bottom, and then a rear bottom. So I'll tell you which way to put them. James Duff, they do a good job. They give you a schematic of everything, so it has it labeled bushing front bottom. Can you see that? Bushing front bottom, rear bottom, and it just shows you a general idea of everything. And then these are the shims that come with it. Bolts. It came with these longer bolts as well, which I'm not sure what they're for yet. But I definitely will find out. So let's go ahead, get all that stuff opened up. I'm gonna go ahead and pull the pallet out and then get both these axles set on dollies so they're a little easier to move around. And then I'll go ahead and throw all this stuff together. So the first thing I like to do when I get kits, especially if they don't come with a lot of instructions, is just dump all my nuts and bolts and washers out into a bucket and then organize everything. So those were all the same diameter, thread pitch and everything, so I put those together. And I'm just going to go ahead and run through here and pick out bolts and nuts and washers that go together. Typically you're going to have a washer on each side with the nut, and they're going to be matching, so grade 8 with grade 8, grade 5 with grade 5. And then if I have like this bracket here, for instance, I'll look and say, okay, well, these little bolts fit in there, so I'll put those bolts in those brackets just so that's all together. So as I go, all I have to do is just grab these bolts, because these go together, obviously. These are for the pivots, and then I'll be good to go. All right, now I got all my nuts and bolts organized. I have these 2 washers and this bolt left over. Everything else is the same. And obviously you can adjust things as you need it. This is just the same size nut and same size washer go to bolts. These 2 grade 8 washers might have to go on this bolt, or maybe they have to go on some of these grade 8s. We'll see what happens when we go. All right, so I got the first side done. I think they sent these bolts because they're longer as a starter bolt. I was able to use the grade 8 bolts to get everything started, but I think they put them in there just in case you need them to help get the 2 sides started. But there's the one side. When you're doing these, you want to make sure that all your holes are up top, because your coil bucket is going to bolt in here. So basically what I did is I got everything on loosely and then tightened everything by hand, and then I used the breaker bar and just scrunched everything down. I did a little bit, little bit, little bit, so that it goes on as even as possible. And that's what we look like. So let's go ahead and put the next side on. All right, there it is. Both sides are on, tightened down. There's no gap. Same thing was on the bottom. There's no gap there. Everything is tight. Basically go until you can't go anymore. Those are forged, it looks like, or cast. Sorry, these are definitely cast, not forged. So they're pretty strong. And these are grade 8 bolts, so they're really strong as well. So you shouldn't have any issues with stripping out unless you cross thread it. They do make a note that you need to check your threads on the inside for powder coat. Looks like they did clean them out, but just in case, check those before you start your bolts. I had one that went in a little hard, so I pulled it out and I threw a tap in there and cleaned them out again. But after that, I went right in. So check all your holes and probably put your bushings in those as well before you throw them on. Should probably be a little easier for you, but I'm gonna go ahead and throw mine on now. All right, so that wasn't working, so now we're gonna try probably the right way to do it. So I got the vise here. We're gonna go ahead and separate these bushings, take everything apart. I'm gonna go ahead and push these bushings into this hole. Just just like that. Make sure you want to try to keep it straight as possible. That powder coat makes it a little tricky. There we are. Now we're gonna put it in the vise like this and squeeze it to push this into the middle. And just like that, it's in there. So that is definitely the easiest way to do it. So before you put the C's on, put your bushings in and use a vise. So I ended up taking both sides back off to get those bushings pressed in. That is definitely the right way to do it, is using a vise or some sort of a press to squeeze them together. I don't have anything. You could probably get away with throwing a bolt through there and squeezing it in. I just don't have any bolts that don't have locking nylon lock nuts on it, and I'd rather not take those nuts on and off a bunch of times and then expect them to lock later down the road. So the vise is the way to go. If you already have them on, then you could throw a bolt in there with washers to pull those on as well. So now that's done, we're gonna go ahead and get the long arms out and throw the long arms on. These 4 bolts are the right length for the radius arms to mount to the C's. So I'm going to go ahead and bolt the radius arms up to the C's. Alright, so I got both the radius arms on now, and they are on loosely. When I build my axles and when I do the swaps and what have you, I like to put all the nuts on the inside. I think it just looks cleaner, because every time you look at a vehicle, you always look at it from the outside. And if you just see the bolt heads, it's just a lot cleaner looking, rather than having, you know, your whole nut and a lot of thread sticking out on that side. So when I do these, that's how I do it. Same thing with the frame brackets for the radius arms. Those will have the heads on the outside of the frame, nuts on the inside of the frame. I just think it looks cleaner. I think directions might call for it on some kits, but the James Duff kits have no directions. So you're pretty much on your own. That's part of the reason why I'm making this video for people if they're trying to do this same swap. It is a little daunting because the reviews say, oh, the instructions suck. So hopefully I can clear it up for you and give you good instructions. But that's where we're at. It looks like this has a piece of rubber on it. I think that's for when it's rubbing on this bolt maybe, or something else. So I might end up scooting that rubber down once that's tightened to protect the brake line from rubbing on those threads. But there's no torque specs on any of this stuff because there's no instructions. So I'm just gonna go ahead and tighten it down pretty good with the breaker bar and call it good. These are all nylon lock nuts, so you shouldn't have to red Loctite them or anything, but you should check them after your first 500 miles or so and make sure everything's still tight. And if things are coming loose, then you could throw some red or blue Loctite on there. I'm not going to worry about it for now, but if I do notice stuff coming loose, then I'll change it. It did say in the instructions when you're running these C's not to use Loctite. It said actually to use anti-C's. So there's that. The rest of them, they should be fine. I was just looking at this and thinking about it. It might be a good idea to leave these radius arm bolts loose, so when you put it underneath the truck, you're not fighting with them, because this one's tight and I can move it a little bit because they're on bushings, but this one's loose and there's so much more play in it. So it might be a lot easier to line these heim joints up with your frame brackets if they're left loose. Alright, so I like to make more work for myself in the future, so I went ahead and tightened all those down. And then I got my heim joints put in. So this front axle is good to go for the most part. I still need to clean up my coil buckets. I have them in here, I believe. Yep, so here are my coil buckets. Just dump those out. Still need to clean them up. They go like that. This is your retainer. So I gotta get my coil springs in and all that for that stuff. So I was just looking at these and I took my factory coil buckets and I placed them up here, and as you can see, maybe you can't see, they don't line up with any of these holes. So looks like James Duff is increasing their sales by changing the bolt pattern so you can't use any of your OEM parts on their kit. So that's awesome. So now I got to go ahead and order their heavy duty lower coil spring bucket to use it on the radius arms. And I heard from one of my buddies who did this that the factory coil buckets don't work either because the shock mounts are on the side and they need to be on the top. So I'm not going to buy their upper coil buckets. I'm just going to cut these shock mounts. I'm going to cut them off the side, grind it flat, and then if I cut them good enough, I can reuse them or just go have a buddy plasma cut me new ones that are going to mount on top. Because it's kind of annoying that they would do that, but I get it. You know, it increases their sales and they get more money, but it would be nice if you could use your OEM parts. Another thing too that I noticed is in my instructions, they have an optional E4OD cross member and frame brackets. That cross member looks super easy to make. These frame brackets are slightly different than these ones. My truck is an E4OD truck, but they didn't have that option on the website when I ordered. So they must have put that option up there right when I ordered or a few days after. And I got the updated instructions, but not the updated parts. So we will see what happens with that. Worst case scenario, I can re-drill some holes and make my own cross member or something, but we'll see. All their stuff is for Broncos too, where the pickups are pretty much the same. So we'll see if I need it or not, but I most likely will, considering that these F150s are pretty similar to the Broncos. So I looked on the James Duff lower coil spring brackets and they're $90. Plus I gotta get them shipped here and go through all that whole hassle. So I'm just gonna modify my own. So I got them placed on. As you can see down there, that hole does not match. It's just a little bit short. So what I'm gonna do is just gonna draw a straight line that encompasses this, and then I'm gonna drill another hole behind it and just make this a big slot right here. And I'm gonna do that on both of them. That way they'll be in the correct location, they'll be in the correct orientation, and everything should work fine. So I'm gonna go ahead and take my die grinder. I made a mark there on all the different pieces. So I'm gonna take the die grinder and I'm gonna try to ream this hole out and drag it back a little bit. All right, so I got one side done. What I ended up doing is I drilled a pilot hole through, and then I would take a 1/2 inch drill bit and I would drill it through, and then I was using my die grinder to clean up the edges. So I'm gonna go ahead and get these ones drilled out, and then I'll clean them all up and paint them. All right, so both sides are done. I'm gonna go ahead and clean those up, paint them with some primer, and then paint them black, just like the axles. So while that's drying, I'm gonna go grab some more hardware and I'll see you in a bit. So we got the coil springs bolted to the axle, and I'm starting to get all my front end stuff disassembled. So I got the drop brackets taken off, the front pivot back brackets taken off. I have both my fuel lines, or sorry, brake lines clamped off with vice grips so I can go ahead and cut them and they won't leak. And then all I gotta do now is disconnect my drive shaft. Probably should have done that first, but I can still do it. And then the pitman arm, and then I can unbolt my coils from the top, and then this whole assembly will drop out and pull out. All right, so the brake lines are cut, drive shaft is removed. These shocks weren't doing a whole lot. So I'll have to go ahead and get some new ones. That whole thing is nice. So now we can put a jack under the diff, pull your coil retaining bolt out, and slowly lower this whole assembly down, and then do that on both sides. All right, we got the twin traction beam stuff all pulled out, and then I got the new axle hung in there. What I did is I slid the axle in. I ended up having to take off this coil spring to be able to fit it in, but we took it off, put it back on, took it back on, and then I jacked up this side and got this coil spring retainer on, and then I went to the other side, jacked up the other side, put that coil retainer on, and then I was able to take the dollies out, jack stands out, and it's just resting, being held up by this. So now I can go ahead and put the radius arm brackets. I'm gonna just go ahead and clamp them to the frame so I can measure and I can see where my coil spring angle is, because obviously we're angled forward and I want that to be up and down. So, but when I lift those up to the frame, it's gonna pull the axle back, and then I can slide it forward and backwards to adjust that. It does look like I am gonna be hitting the transmission cross member on this side, so I'm gonna have to probably notch that out a little bit, and then hopefully one of those holes will line up with it. So let's go ahead and get that done. So a few things to note. These are 6-inch leaf spring, 6-inch lift coil springs for a brick nose Ford. With the 6-inch spring, you get 4 inches of lift. So that'll leave me at the same ride height that I'm at now. When you're putting these coils on, you want the flat of your spring and the end of it to be sticking out. That way you can actually get the coil retainer on, and then that will determine where your lower mount goes. So in the videos of me drilling these out and whatnot, I had them on the wrong way, but I got it all figured out. So just so you guys know that, you want it to be oriented this way. And then the other side, this is going to be facing out, which is the other direction. Okay, with the axle in, I took off my bracket, and I am going to have to drill out my holes now. So I'm going to go ahead, I have one clamp on there. I'm going to go ahead and probably throw one more clamp on there just to hold it in place so it doesn't move. And then I'll start drilling my holes. The bottom hole didn't end up lining up with that transition cross member, so probably gonna have to drill an extra hole in this bracket or something to make that work. But here we are. Alright, so I got the first 2 bolts put in. Basically, when I had it clamped, I drilled one hole, and then I bolted that tight. Then I drilled the next hole, bolted that one tight, took the clamp off. Now it's not going anywhere. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw my radius arm up into that bracket, and then go look at the other side and see what I need to do to make that one work. Okay, so I got this radius arm put up into that bracket. Now I'm checking out where my coil spring is sitting. So I took my jack and I put some tension on this. It's not all the way at ride height, but it's tight. So we can see that that coil spring is sitting pretty straight up and down, which means that we are far enough forward, backwards, we're in the sweet spot. So yeah, she's looking good. Now I just gotta do the other side and I can finalize everything. Okay, so I took some measurements, and from the top of the frame down, the bracket is at 3 1/4, which is right here. And then I measured from my body mount forward 13 inches. So the front of my bracket's gonna sit. So then 5 inches back is just right here behind this bolt. So I'm gonna go ahead and just cut out this one bolt. Take the grinder, cut it over here a little bit, then come down here, and then I'm gonna go underneath and then back out. So we shouldn't be removing too much material. These cross members are pretty overbuilt, but if I have any issues with it moving or anything, then I can put some gussets in there and whatnot, or I can weld this whole bracket to my radius arm mount. That's not too big of a deal since they're both going to come down to be taken off. So go ahead and start getting that cut out. All right, so I got my cross member notched there. Looks good. I had to notch it all the way to the back. Basically what I did is I measured from my body mount back to my radius arm mount for that 13 inches. And then I kept trimming my transmission cross member until I got to the exact same spot as the other side. So everything's the same. And I used the body mount as my measuring location because they should be the same on both sides from the factory. Obviously, there might be a little variation there, but for my purposes, this is perfect. So I got 2 of the holes drilled out, and then I got 2 bolts in, and it looks good. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna jack the axle up and throw some jack stands underneath the axle tubes and get a nice ride height figured out and get everything underneath the truck cleared out. All right, that looks pretty good to me. If you run to the other side, looks good. Everything is perpendicular. Radius arms look good. This is my ride height right here. So looks pretty good. I might need to clearance my cross member a little bit, but we're looking good. Nice. So here is that brake line, and we have plenty of brake line. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna feed, once I'm ready, I'm gonna take all my old brake line stuff out. I'm gonna feed this brake line through that hole back there, and I'm gonna try to get this 90 facing towards the cab, and then just put a male-to-male adapter between these two, and it should work flawlessly. But for now, I'm gonna go ahead and get my steering kit put together. So I'm gonna go ahead, put my alignment tabs on both my rotors, and then I'm gonna measure it so that my rotors are parallel. And I'm gonna measure how long I need for my crossbar, and then I can measure how long I need for my drag link. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, I threw the alignment plates on. I measured it and I got it even, and then I went ahead and measured for my cross link, and that one was at 48.5. So I took my piece of DOM, cut it at 48.5. Now I'm gonna go ahead and weld my bungs in. I need to go get some hard wire though. I had dual shield in this, and I'm not welding this with dual shield. Alright, so I got the bungs welded in, both sides. I'm gonna go ahead and let that cool so I can paint it. And then once it's painted, I'm gonna go ahead and throw it in. So I got my cross link all painted up. I'm waiting for that to dry. While that's drying, I just went ahead and filled up my diff. I just used some of this Fram 8090. Basically just the cheapest gear oil I could find. Since I'm doing the break-in, I have to drain it after 500 miles and replace it. So I just found the cheapest stuff possible for the break-in. So I'm running that same stuff front and rear for both. So while the paint's drying on that, I'm gonna go ahead and reassemble my front drive shaft. So I was soaking my U-bolts and nuts in some chem dip. So I'm gonna go ahead, open this up, pull those out, wipe them all clean, and then I'll throw them on the truck. All right, so I was not 100% sure if my front U-joint was the same or not, and turns out it is not. So the Dana 44 actually has a smaller U-joint than what was in before, so I'm gonna have to go get a new U-joint tomorrow. But in the time being, I'm gonna go ahead and see if my brake solution is gonna work. So I picked up this adapter. It's just a male to male, so this is female on both sides, and I should be able to just undo this hard line and splice the two together. So we'll see what happens. Okay, so that worked flawlessly. You got that brass fitting between the two lines, and I was able to get the soft line out. I pulled the soft line out the other side. We have plenty of slack for us to be able to go full droop. Here is the part I used. This is from CarQuest, BLU3C. It is a 3/16 3A/24 inverted flare. And yeah, that's what I used. So if you guys are wondering what part it is so you can do the same thing, there it is. She is turning out awesome. Super excited. Hopefully this paint's dried and I can get my crossbar put in. And then I got my drag link all welded up. Wait for that to cool so I can paint that one as well. Alright, so I went ahead and took this 1.5" socket and tightened up the radius arms. I got both my cross link and my drag link put in. I know I still need to do a panhard bar. I'm just not going to do that tonight, but that'll be in this video. Shelby came out, we bled the brakes, so the brakes are good to go. I put the remainder of the bolts in the radius arm mounts, because I know earlier in the video I only put 2 in, so I went back, drilled the holes, put them in. We're pretty much done. It's getting dark out. I gotta go spend some time with the family, so I'm gonna go ahead and throw the tires on so I can take this bad boy out of the shop, and then tomorrow we'll be doing the rear axle. All right, it is a new day and we're gonna go ahead and get back to work on the F150. So last night I went ahead and got the disc brake set up on the Ford 9-inch. This kit is kind of interesting. It uses all these spacers to adjust your caliper in and out. I guess these 9-inches, the flanges aren't the same on both sides, so that's why they did it this way instead of just a bent bracket. Because I did have to take it apart a couple times getting that caliper in the right spot. The other thing I had to do as well was cut off the bearing cap, because these disc brake mounts, they retain the bearing as well, so they don't need the factory bearing retainer. And then I went ahead and made some hard lines for it. I got my what are they called, brake line mounts on. All that stuff is good. This side as well. So this should be good to go and just go straight into the truck. I went and picked up some new U-bolts for my yokes. I needed one for the 9-inch, and then I got one here for the Dana 44 because the Dana 40 front U-joint is bigger. So there's a 44 U-bolt and there's a 40 U-bolt. You can see it's quite a bit bigger. This will actually fit in the 9-inch. I did realize that when I got back with all my parts. Alright, so I went and got the U-joint for the front axle, and you do need to get a conversion U-joint. All they had was Moog U-joints, which are alright. I mean, they're made in the US. Actually, I think this one's made in Mexico. Their U-bolts are made in the US, but this is made in Mexico. So there's your part number for the U-joint you're going to need if you're using the Moog. I'm sure that part number will cross-reference to other companies, but that'll convert your front brick nose drive shaft to the 77 era yokes. So going ahead, that's my rear. Got the new one in the front. I gotta go ahead and put that greaser in, grease it, and I'll throw my drive shaft in. So the bolts I'm using on my panhard bar for the tine joints are a 9/16 bolt. The hole on my axle for the factory panhard bar is 3/8. So I went down to Ace and I picked up these brass bushings. These are, oh sorry, the hole on my axle is a 3/4. So these are a 3/4 outside diameter, and then these are a 1/2 inch inside, which is too small for my bolt, but that was the closest I could find. So I'm gonna go ahead, throw these in the vise. I'm gonna ream these out to 9/16, and then I'll be good to go. All right, I got the panhard bar all cut and welded up. Letting that cool before I paint it. I ended up having to clearance my motor cross member, so I had to cut it out a bit with the plasma torch. You can do it with a grinder as well. Plasma torch is what I have, and it's faster. So now I gotta figure out what I'm gonna do with the power steering lines. Probably end up pushing them up. And then I got my panhard bar mount all welded in as well. So once all that stuff is cooled off, go ahead and paint it, and then I can throw the panhard bar in. All right, so I got my panhard bar set in my truck. Everything is good to go. Now my drag link is too long. So when I originally measured it, my body was probably sitting too far off to the driver's side. And now that I kind of centered it up and put that drag link in, it's in the middle now. So better long than short. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut off one of these bungs and shorten it down a little bit. Probably take an inch out of it, and then weld the bung back on, paint it, and then we'll be good to go. All right, so I got everything put in there. Now I'm gonna go ahead and throw the tires on the jack stands and turn my wheel both ways and make sure nothing's hitting or rubbing, and then I can adjust my stops on my knuckles to where I want them so the tires will stop turning where I want. All right, I got the truck in here, backed in. We're gonna go ahead, pull the tires off, put the frame on jack stands, and drop the axle out. I haven't touched this rear end since high school, and it definitely needs some help. These shocks are definitely blown out. This one has no bushings down there, and brake cables have been rubbing on it. So I'm gonna go ahead and fix all of this stuff by just putting in a new axle. And I won't be having ABS. That axle's a non-ABS axle, but that's all right because I didn't have ABS anyway. It didn't work. So now I'm gonna go ahead, disconnect the shocks and disconnect my drive shaft and start undoing all of these U-bolt nuts, and the whole axle should fall out. Make sure that when you're undoing the U-bolt nuts, you have a jack underneath your diff so it doesn't just drop to the ground. So I have a parking brake kit for that 9-inch. So that means I gotta knock off my drums and get my e-brake pulled out of here. Same thing on the other side. So I'm gonna go ahead and knock those off and take a look. All right, so I got everything disconnected. Now all I gotta do is pull off my axle U-bolts. Those are 7/8 nut. I'm gonna hit them with my impact and lower it onto the dollies. I got a dolly on each side, jack in the middle. So hopefully that can help me bring it down slowly. So when you're taking this apart, you don't need to keep the U-bolts. You're supposed to get new U-bolts every time you change them because they do stretch. They are a stretch fit. This top piece, you need to keep this, and then you have a block in here if your truck has a tow package. You need to keep that as well, or else your truck's gonna be sitting squatted, and we don't like none of that squatted stuff. So keep those two items, and then you need new U-bolts, which I already have. So now I'm gonna go do the other side. Just like that, I lowered it onto the dollies. I was able to slip the jack out the back. Now I can roll the axle out on the dollies. Okay, so I have the rear axle set in now. The easiest way I found to do these by yourself is to set one side and then make the other side fit. So what I'm gonna do is go ahead and jack this side up, get my spacer put in and my U-bolt started. And then I'm not gonna tighten them all the way down. I'm just gonna do them tight enough to where nothing can slip out. It's all being held in by the pins. And then I'm gonna go ahead and get the other side set. All right, so here's where we're at. Got the axle hanging on the leaf spring. I have the nut in that hole. I have the pin in that hole, and this pin in that hole. And everything's tight enough where nothing's gonna slip out or move. Now I can take my jack, go to the other side, and jack that side up into place and get everything aligned. All right, once your other side is aligned, you're gonna wanna go ahead and check your U-bolts. So what I generally do is I'll look from the back here and look at it And if one of your U-bolts is sticking out, or if they're both sticking one way or the other, then just straighten them out, or else they won't tighten evenly. You're gonna have some issues. So we're looking pretty good. So now I'm gonna go ahead and tighten them down with the breaker bar. The other thing you want to make sure of when you're tightening your U-bolts down is that you're going evenly, so that you have the same amount of thread sticking out of each one, so then you know your U-bolts are being tightened straight up, not at an angle. So I went ahead and I got my e-brake cables put in. I had to trim off some of this rebound spring because it has its own spring and it was too long to fit in there. So I just trimmed it down a bit. We should be good to go now. I got the drive shaft put in. I got to get my e-brake cords zip tied out of the way so they're not rubbing on my shock. And then I got to connect the brakes still, and then I can fill the diff up and throw some tires on it. Alright, so I got my brake hose in there. I had to cut the old hose off. The fitting on the frame side was seized to the line so it wouldn't spin at all, and it also was too big, so had to cut it off, put a smaller one on. I believe I put a 3/16 on there, but now it's all good to go. I can go ahead and bleed the brakes. Alright, so Shelby helped me bleed the brakes. I threw the wheels and tires back on the rear end and pulled her out of the shop. So here we are. Looks pretty good. I still have to do a little bit of finishing touches on the front, but now we can go for a test drive. Everything is working good. I don't hear any noises. It's pretty quiet. I need to check if my speedometer works or not, where that's at. It definitely works, but I don't know if it's accurate. Before it read 10 miles an hour slower than I was actually going because of the stock gearing and the bigger tires, so I need to check that as well. For your initial break-in on your gears, if you did re-gear, you want to drive for about 15 minutes, let it sit for an hour. Do that 4 different times, and then you're good to go and drive it for longer distances. You don't want to be taking road trips within the first 500 miles though. You want to make them small trips, like to and from town and whatnot. So we're a little cold right now, as you can tell. It's winter time, so it's about 15 degrees out, so I'm going to change that to 20 minutes, and my cool down time is only going to be about a 45 minute, but the cool down doesn't really matter. You can go longer. It's just important that it goes all the way cold. You just want to be able to get the heat cycles going so your gears break in properly. So I'm going to go ahead and finish my drive for 20 minutes, and then when I get back to the house, I'm going to check over everything, make sure everything's looking good, nothing's doing anything weird or fell off or anything, and yeah, it'll be good. So first test drive was a success. Everything worked as it should, no weird noises. I don't see anything leaking, axle seals or diff or pinion, or none of my brake lines are leaking. So that's the swap, guys. Pretty sweet stuff. So all I gotta do now is get my front shocks figured out. I'm gonna basically take the tractor and flex the truck out and see if those shocks hit. If they hit, then I'm gonna have to move those mounts from the side to the top and then get a shorter shock, but we will see. It also looks like I might need to clearance that cross member some more. The diff on the back side might hit it instead of that. We had issues with the panhard bar in the front. Now the back, we might have issues with the diff. So I might have to go in there with the plasma cutter again and clearance that, but I won't know until I flex it out. But anyways, that is all for this video. If any of you are from the Facebook groups that I'm in, thanks for watching. I'll be putting updates as I keep going, and I find more information out about the shocks and the diff. If I need to cut some more of the cross member, I'll post it in the Facebook group just to have that in there. So thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you on the next one.